Daily mission, time-limited kill the food convoy from Fallout Shelter 12988 to Wild Wolf Town. Reward, 50 technology points. Related to Wild Wolf Town? Zhao Yu was delighted upon realizing the daily mission was connected to Wild Wolf Town. This meant he could weaken Wild Wolf Town's strength and earn daily mission rewards simultaneously. However, he wondered about the force of this grain transport convoy. Zhao Yu thought it best to leave the matter to professionals. He quickly called 3 sergeant commanders and briefed them on the mission, asking if they had a plan. Report, Commander. To know the enemy and know ourselves is to be victorious in every battle. I need to dispatch the reconnaissance team to understand the enemy's strength. The commanders responded. Being sergeants, their abilities were limited, and they couldn't offer suggestions without sufficient intelligence. Zhao Yu hesitated. He only had 3 combat squads and a guard platoon at his disposal. The base currently had 15 soldiers in combat squads and 30 in the guard platoon, all soldiers. Taking all 45 might not guarantee victory, especially as he felt somewhat less confident commanding the 30 from the guard platoon after his last ambush experience. He checked his tech points and, coincidentally, had exactly 20 points. 20 points to train a commander? He hesitated. 20 tech points equated to 20 soldiers, or 4 regular Special Forces soldiers. Forget it, let's take a look. Zhao Yu gritted his teeth and spent 20 technology points, waiting another 5 minutes before the commanding officer emerged from the training camp. Zhao Yu immediately informed him of his current task and asked if the commander had any ideas. Report, sir. Their purpose this time is to transport foods, not to ambush, so the number of people they bring must not be many. Based on the power distribution around Wild Wolf Town, they certainly won't be too worried about the safety of this transport team. The commander was very capable. After looking at the hand-drawn map, he quickly drew conclusions and formulated a battle plan. However, the equipment mentioned made Zhao Yu hesitant. Is a rocket launcher absolutely necessary? He had a rocket launcher, but without ammunition, which was as good as not having one. The equipment requirement given by the commanding officer was at least 6 rocket launchers and 12 rockets. If there are no rocket launchers to support, the success rate of this operation is only 69.33%, the commander stated calmly and confidently. And if we have them? 81.65%. Zhao Yu stroked his chin, not knowing how this win rate was calculated, but he thought it was worth a try. He had a box of pistol bullets transported to the munitions factory for recycling. The result was as he expected, a 20% loss, but fortunately, it was converted back to raw materials. Looking at the resources needed to exchange for rocket ammunition, he found that 1 box of bullets pushed the progress to about 90%. With this, a dozen boxes of bullets should be enough. Zhao Yu breathed a sigh of relief, worried that the shortfall in rocket ammunition would be too great, but thankfully, it was manageable. However, the amount of bullets consumed was significant, with 1 box containing 1,500 rounds and a dozen boxes amounting to nearly 20,000 rounds. Fortunately, he had brought back several tens of thousands of rounds from his last trip to Blackwind Stronghold, so he had enough for the time being. Recycling with a loss wasn't usually a good deal, but in the current situation, Zhao Yu had no other concerns. After a while, 12 rockets were made. Beside them were 12 rocket launchers. On the other side, the commander had already prepared his weapons and was ready to set off at any time. Sir, we can only carry 6 rocket launchers. Huh. This was too much. The vehicle's load is limited. Bringing 6 more rocket launchers will reduce the success rate of this operation, the commander said. Zhao Yu gave a thumbs up and praised, professional, let's do as you said, bring 6 rocket launchers. Under the arrangement of the commander officer, 3 combat squads each boarded a vehicle and set off first. Following them was a temporary squad made up of 5 soldiers, escorting Zhao Yu as they departed. At the base, 25 soldiers remained in the guard and continuing to protect the base. The commander officer had a maximum command limit of 20 people, so the number of personnel he could bring was limited. The extra soldier was assigned for Zhao Yu to command. Zhao Yu didn't have much to command. Having 1 more person with him was just to help out with miscellaneous tasks. With the commander officer handling the coordination, Zhao Yu was much more relaxed, as many things didn't require his direct involvement. His only task was to wait for specific times when the commander officer would tell him which orders to give. Then he would simply authorize actions as instructed by the commander officer. Of course, to prevent any unforeseen circumstances, Zhao Yu also gave advance authorization to the commander officer, allowing him to respond directly in special situations without needing to consult him. For instance, in the event of another ambush like the previous one, the commander officer could organize a counterattack immediately. Under the commander officer's coordination, they might not face any ambush at all. Just like now, Zhao Yu was accompanied by only 2 vehicles. The assault and reconnaissance squads that had gone ahead were already out of sight, clearly having embarked on a mission as directed by the commander officer. An hour later, the convoy stopped at a depression. Please give the order to stop the engine and wait for orders. Turn off the engine. Commander, please order the reconnaissance team to investigate the enemy's movements.
Reconnaissance team.
Zhao Yu was also enjoying himself. He would ask the commander for the reason for every step he took. He gained a lot of experience and indirectly improving his military acumen. A short while later, the sergeant commander came to report. Report, we have scouted the enemy's movements. The enemy has 211 people, including 151 non-combatants and 60 combatants. Zhao Yu gained a preliminary understanding of the enemy. More than 50 vehicles were responsible for transporting grain and valuable resources from the shelter. Most were residents of Wild Wolf Town with a few armed personnel. Report to the commander. For this operation, one suggests we neutralize the threat. Rarely, the sergeant commander proactively made a suggestion, which surprised Zhao Yu. Commander, if we're just plundering once, then annihilating the enemy would suffice. But we plan to attack Wild Wolf Town later. Rashly killing these non-combatants will only backfire. Zhao Yu understood immediately, grasping the sergeant commander's intent. The top management class of Wild Wolf Town was different from the residents. They were the armed force, numbering around 300 to 500 people. Eliminating them wouldn't cause the residents of Wild Wolf Town to rebel, as they didn't have high loyalty. But if they killed the residents of Wild Wolf Town this time, when they officially attacked the town, it might force the enemy to mobilize all its people for war. Wild Wolf Town had over 5,000 people. Excluding the elderly, weak, and sick, there were still at least 3,000 or 4,000 able to bear arms, which would make the battle much harder. Then we'll neutralize the threat, spare the civilians, eliminate all threats, wait. If possible, tell those civilians that this is to avenge the previous ambush, and let them tell Li Yong to clean his neck and wait for me to kill him. Yes, Commander. Zhao Yu and his team alighted from the vehicles, hiding them in the forest and covering them with camouflage cloths. After walking for about half an hour, they reached their destination. The sergeant commander was busy, constantly assigning tasks to the other 3 squad leaders. The number of people around Zhao Yu gradually dwindled, until only a soldier remained, and even the sergeant commander was nowhere to be seen. As Zhao Yu pondered how the battle would unfold, a slight tremor suddenly vibrated through the ground. They were coming. In the distance, a convoy approached slowly, led by an armored off-road vehicle with several gunmen seated inside. The first vehicle maintained a distance from the rest of the convoy, with its gunmen using binoculars to scan both sides of the road. Zhao Yu lay on the hillside, hidden behind branches, observing the situation on the road through the gaps. When he noticed someone looking in his direction, he quickly ducked his head. Bwoo. The leading vehicle passed by without noticing Zhao Yu. At this point, Zhao Yu had no idea where the ambush point. After the vehicles passed, Zhao Yu slightly raised his head to continue observing. He noticed that every few trucks in the convoy were interspersed with an armed vehicle. This made Zhao Yu frown. The enemy was too dispersed. If he had enough manpower, it would be easier to deal with such enemy. But he didn't have enough manpower. Zhao Yu was worried, unsure of the sergeant commander's reliability. This was the first battle with a commander involved. If it failed, he would immediately relocate his base without a second thought. As for revenge, that would have to wait for another opportunity. Despite pondering for a long time, Zhao Yu couldn't figure out how the commander would conduct the battle. Bwoo. One by one, vehicles passed on the road in front of him. Compared to the previous group, the guards in the middle seemed more lax. not only failing to watch their surroundings carefully, but even playing poker on the vehicles. Zhao Yu also observed the armed personnel's equipment, most of them carrying rifles with occasional armed vehicles equipped with mounted machine guns. Besides, Zhao Yu spotted his vehicle, the electric off-road car he had lost in a previous ambush. After about 20 or 30 vehicles passed, Zhao Yu felt uncertain when the sergeant commander would make a move. Suddenly, gunfire erupted ahead. What's going on? People in the convoy immediately shouted, "Stop the vehicles!" A leading person hastily halted the convoy, picking up a walkie-talkie to inquire. Zhao Yu only caught a few shouted orders from the leader. Subsequently, several armed vehicles with gunmen rushed forward. This surprised Zhao Yu. How did the sergeant commander manage that? The enemy's dispersed formation was not advantageous for them. Yet, they were actively gathering towards the front. Zhao Yu also roughly understood that the main battlefield was likely ahead of the convoy. Shortly after the armed vehicle left, intense gunfire erupted from the east side. Zhao Yu's army was not attacking in the direction of the convoy's head, but rather its tail. Attack from the west? Zhao Yu was astonished. At that moment, the civilians guarding the cargo became extremely panicked. Some got off the vehicles to look towards the rear, while others curled up inside, shivering in fear. However, no one dared to run away. They all stayed obediently beside the vehicles they were responsible for. Boom dash! Several explosions sounded from the direction of the west, where the convoy's head was. Rocket-propelled grenades. The blasts were loud and varied slightly, suggesting a chain reaction caused by the vehicles being ignited by rocket-propelled grenades. The civilians who had alighted to look around were startled by the sight, some squatting on the ground in fright, others hurriedly scrambling back into the vehicles. The civilians wouldn't pick up arms and join the fight when danger approached, meaning that post-battle cleanup would be easier. Bang dash! Several more shots rang out, distinct from regular gunfire like sniper rifles. Zhao Yu peered through the gap, anxiously looking to the east, unsure of the situation. His position was awkward, right in the middle of the convoy, with neither the head nor the tail in sight. They're dead. All dead. Someone suddenly shouted up ahead, followed by several people running towards the woods. As people started fleeing, more and more jumped from the vehicles and swarmed into the forest. At this point, no one dared to drive the vehicle, because apart from the main road, the paths on either side were virtually impassable for vehicles. With both the head and tail of the convoy engaged in battle, driving a vehicle would be suicide. Several civilians also ran towards Zhao Yu's hiding spot. As they climbed the hill and saw Zhao Yu, they reflexively raising their hands high. "Don't shoot, we're unarmed. Don't shoot," they pleaded repeatedly. Zhao Yu was unsure how to handle these people at the moment. Other civilians still running in his direction changed course upon seeing the anomaly, with several running back to the road and towards the forest on the other side. Zhao Yu slowly stood up, while the soldier beside him remained meticulously prone on the ground. "Get up, check if they have any weapons." "Yes, Commander." The soldier finally got up and began checking each civilian in front of him for weapons. These people had seen his face, and Zhao Yu pondered whether he should silence them. As he was wrestling with this thought, he suddenly realized that the gunfire seemed to have stopped. Was the fight over? It was only then that Zhao Yu finally saw the sergeant commander again, who was now running towards him along the road. With such a bold approach, it seemed the fight was indeed over. "Report to the commander, mission accomplished. We killed 71 and captured 51. All threats have been neutralized. Awaiting further instructions. All the armed personnel are dead?" "Yes, Commander." The civilians in front of him grew even more frightened, pleadingly looking at Zhao Yu. "Take them to where the other prisoners are," Zhao Yu said casually, then left the hillside and walked towards the convoy. He looked in all directions when he arrived at the main road. Towards the head of the convoy, he could see thick smoke rising in the distance, indicating that vehicles were still burning after the explosions. To the east, at the tail of the convoy, there was no such commotion. He only saw many people with their hands on their heads squatting on the ground, with a few people watching over them. Zhao Yu took out his binoculars and saw that the ones guarding the prisoners at the rear were the 5 members of the assault team. Only then did he realize and turn back to the commander, What about our men? Any casualties? None. None. The enemy had 60 armed personnel, and they only had 20. Had they really annihilated the enemy so completely? How did you do it? After an explanation, Zhao Yu understood how the battle had been fought. A roadblock was set up on the main route, and when the enemy's armed personnel rushed to provide support, the scouts hidden along the roadside fired rocket launchers. The first volley of rockets directly hit 6 vehicles, killing more than 20 people, including the enemy's leader. Snipers took out the remaining enemies with precision shots, while those attempting to rush into the forest were eliminated by other soldiers. The plan was for the front of the convoy to act first, followed by the rear, but due to the long distance between the two ends and the difficulty in relaying information, the commander had ordered an assault 3 minutes after the convoy stopped. At the rear, about a dozen armed personnel were taken out by 5 assault troops and 1 sniper. This was too easy. Just over 20 people, and they had won the battle? Zhao Yu felt a surge of elation, realizing that training the commander had been a wise investment. At the very least, he didn't possess such commanding skills. Soon, after a quick inventory, dozens of firearms, several machine guns, and various ammunition were confiscated. Additionally, over 40 vehicles worth of goods and more than 50 prisoners were captured. Retreat. Zhao Yu decided to take all these goods with them. There are more than 10 kilometers from here to Wild Wolf Town. Without a vehicle, it would take at least 4 to 5 hours to walk. By the time those fleeing civilians returned to Wild Wolf Town, it would be 5 to 6 hours later when the new troops arrived. These civilians were obedient, following Zhao Yu's instructions to turn the vehicles around and start driving to the base. When Zhao Yu got back and saw the long line of cars in front, he still felt like he was dreaming. This is easy, that I thought. But he understood that a normal warfare between 2 armies wouldn't be this easy. Thinking back to the last time he was ambushed, this total victory didn't seem like much. After all, he was almost annihilated by the enemy last time. When passing through the misleading section of the road, Zhao Yu left 2 soldiers to handle the aftermath and prevent being tracked. On the way back, Zhao Yu was worried about being chased by the new army and kept looking back from time to time. Although he knew that it would take hours for the other side to find out their goods had been stolen, he was still extremely tense about it. Fortunately, the journey back to the base was smooth and safe. After a brief rest, Zhao Yu arranged jobs for the 50 prisoners to unload the goods from dozens of vehicles and keep them in an empty building next door. Will they kill us? I don't know. These people look like they're from a big organization. They're all in military uniforms. The prisoners gathered together, nervously chatting. At this moment, a soldier walked towards them. Everyone, line up. It's time to eat. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Being fed meant that they wouldn't be killed for the time being. When the group lined up and walked towards the dining area, they were shocked. White rice. There's more food. The people at the front of the line stared at the fragrant food in the big pot and drooled. Sir, is this for us to eat? Someone asked in disbelief. Can't you eat these in Wild Wolf Town? Zhao Yu asked casually. The few of them looked at each other. What we usually eat the most is dry expired foods. It's dry and hard, and there's a rancid smell. Is this really for us? Someone asked nervously. Everyone gets one. Grab a bowl or a plate and line up for your meal. On the way back, he had been pondering how to deal with these prisoners. Releasing them was definitely not an option, at least not until Wild Wolf Town was conquered. So, they had to be kept and fed, which was convenient as there were various menial tasks for them to do. Therefore, after receiving 50 technology points as a daily task reward, Zhao Yu extravagantly spent 25 of those points to train 5 cooks. Although few in number, these cooks were adept at preparing large-scale meals, easily managing to cook enough for 100 people. Soon, the first in line, a thin and gaunt man, received his meal, a bowl of porridge, a fast food tray with a portion of rice and 3 dishes. The gaunt man swallowed a mouthful of saliva and hurriedly took a sip of the porridge without even moving away. How is it? There's no sand, exclaimed the gaunt man, tears streaming down his face. Quick, quick, move aside. It's my turn now, the second man in line said hastily. Zhao Yu pointed to an open space guarded by soldiers and said to the gaunt man, Don't block the way here. go over there to enjoy your meal." From their reactions, it seemed that life in Wild Wolf Town had not been easy for these normal people. Zhao Yu took the opportunity to inquire about the situation in Wild Wolf Town. Gun manufacturing line? Zhao Yu was quite shocked to hear it. He hadn't expected that Wild Wolf Town actually had a gun manufacturing industry. Not complete guns, just the barrels. A clever man scratched his head and said, "The barrels we make are taken to Black Rock City for sale." Zhao Yu understood the situation well now. The weapon production line was definitely in Black Rock City. Factory line for weapons in the city would mean paying wages, and not a small amount at that. On the other hand, by outsourcing the production of these weapon parts to these small towns, the cost was much lower. According to their description, they were obligated to work in the town as a form of compulsory labor, a requirement to stay in the town. They worked at least 16 hours a day without wages, but even the food provided was minimal, just 2 meals a day with porridge often containing sand. "Why don't you all leave?" Zhao Yu asked. "Leave?" The gaunt man seemed bewildered, as if he had never considered this possibility. Initially, Zhao Yu had been worried about the possibility of the prisoners revolting, but after a brief exchange, he realized that his concerns were unfounded. These prisoners were all thin as sticks, malnourished, with a numbness in their eyes, seemingly having lost any thought of resistance. "Sir, when do we start working?" After having a full meal, they all seemed eager to start working. Zhao Yu turned to look at the prisoners. They ate ravenously, as if afraid that someone might snatch their food away if they ate too slow. This saved Zhao Yu a lot of trouble. He ordered some people to wash the bowls and plates that they had eaten. Then, Zhao Yu brought the rest of the people to the building next door. There were 3 buildings nearby. One was used for storage, one housed the soldiers, and the third one was empty. Zhao Yu led them to the empty building and had them clean up the building. After that, he herded all the prisoners to the top floor for rest and assigned a few soldiers to guard them. Having arranged these matters, Zhao Yu fell into deep thought back at the base. Taking the prisoners was a necessity, unless he didn't want those supplies. As he understood, the shelter had been almost completely emptied, except for some industrial equipment. Everything movable and valuable was now moved here. Clearly, the Wild Wolf Town forces didn't plan to occupy the shelter. They just wanted to take the goods. However, from the fact that they hadn't destroyed the indoor cultivation equipment, it seemed they were treating it as a fertile field. "I'll think about the Wild Wolf Town matter later." Zhao Yu was feeling that the most pressing issue was what to do with the prisoners in the base. Keeping them next door didn't seem appropriate as it was too close to the base. If word got out, it could pose a risk. As for eliminating all the prisoners, Zhao Yu couldn't bring himself to do it. He wasn't an executioner or a homicidal maniac. "No, I need to plan this carefully." Ideas began to form in Zhao Yu's mind. He planned to open up a new territory and expand the base. To the east of the photovoltaic power plant was a river. Although the river flow was not substantial, it was sufficient for daily needs. "We can build a settlement across the river to accommodate these civilians." Also, another base inside the photovoltaic power plant doesn't seem quite right. Zhao Yu thought that as more buildings were erected, it wouldn't make sense to keep them with the power plant. It would be better to have a clear division of labor. Use the photovoltaic power plant solely for power generation with some people guarding it, and the base should plant outside to establish a new military zone. Separating the military zone from the industrial and residential areas would effectively prevent the leakage of the base's situation. After all, his buildings appeared out of thin air, and in the short term, nobody could notice it. However, if this continued, there indeed were some hidden risks. Zhao Yu quickly took out a map and began planning his new base. After careful consideration, he designated an area 500 meters north of the photovoltaic power plant as his new military base. To the east of the photovoltaic power plant, he marked an area for residential use. There was a large space outside the east gate. The area to the northeast was occupied by Meng Xian and his group, while the southern part was still vacant, ideal for developing and settling the prisoners. Conveniently, there were 10 idle engineers in his base who could direct these civilians in some construction work. "If we're going to establish a settlement, we need to give it a name. It won't seem abrupt, nor will it arouse suspicion. What name should I choose?" Zhao Yu found particularly troublesome. Unable to think of one immediately, he decided not to dwell on it and planned to name it once the settlement was built. For now, let's get these people some works. At the same time, I'll need to continue expanding the guard force. Currently, he had a total of 30 soldiers, all accounted for in the guard force. According to the plan, he needed to divide the guard force into 3 groups. One to guard the residential area, another for the photovoltaic power plant, and the third for the military base. Fortunately, soldiers were inexpensive, costing only 1 technology point each. Zhao Yu had just harvested a batch of grain and could afford to maintain even 1,000 people. The shelter's food supply was abundant, enough to support 1,000 people for a year, and there was so much that it was hard to store it all. Zhao Yu thought for a long time about the base that night, the residential and industrial areas, and place for farms in the future. In addition, the war with Wild Wolf Town might cause the Black Rock City to intervene as well. Amidst these tangled and unresolved thoughts, Zhao Yu unknowingly fell asleep. Motherf asterisk Kerr. Who dares to steal my goods? Liang was quite frantic after receiving the news. Boss, according to the people who escaped, they are here for revenge. Revenge? Liang calmed down a bit and remembered what Instructor Wang had told him. Are you talking about that group of soldiers?
Yes.
This time, too, it was a group of soldiers, all in military uniforms. Liang was feeling uneasy. Could it be that they had robbed some major group? He felt a chill down his spine and went to find Instructor Wang. Don't panic. Instructor Wang soothed Liang. Since they let someone came back to send a message, they know it was us who robbed them. Not attacking directly, what does that indicate? They don't have the strength to defeat us? Exactly. Instructor Wang nodded and said, I was worried before that the other party might be from a major group. They are likely just a small force supported by some power. Are you referring to the people from Black Rock City? There's been no news from Black Rock City, nor has anyone come to us for an explanation, which means the power behind them isn't that strong. So, we should continue as we were. Liang breathed a sigh of relief. Then should I send someone to check it out? He was still too young. Sometimes, he even felt that Uncle Wang had become old and timid. After experiencing such a thing, he realized that the other party's experience was very important, and his attitude was slightly better. Whether to go or not is up to you. Since the other party dared to make a move, they probably won't stay in the same place for us. But it's not certain. They might want to lure us out and set up another ambush outside the city. You need to consider this. However, I think the most urgent task right now is to find out where these people came from. Right now, the enemy is hidden and we are exposed, making many things inconvenient to carry out. So, we should send someone to inquire about the situation in the surrounding areas. Liang nodded as there was some truth to this. Then let's find out which force they belong to. But I still want to send someone to check first, in case our goods are still there. The quantity of those goods was not small, and even he was greatly tempted, unwilling to give it up just like that. Soon, Liang gathered his men and left Wild Wolf Town again. Everyone, move faster. We need to reach Gao's village before it gets dark. Meng Xian led the team, addressing her weary teammates behind her. They had already started their return from Black Rock City, only one person short of their original number. Only Xiao Lu succeeded in advancing to a second-tier agility enhancer. Sister Ming, let's rest for a while, Xiao Lu said breathlessly. Even as an enhancer, he was quite tired at this moment. We can't rest. We must reach Gao's village, Meng Xian said solemnly. In the camps outside Black Rock City, many gangs live by looting. Although she was already a third-tier enhancer, if there were too many people and she got surrounded, it would still be difficult to escape. Therefore, every time they came to Black Rock City, they would speed up their journey to avoid being robbed. We don't have much with us, it should be fine, right? Better safe than sorry. The others suppressed their desire to rest and continued to press on their way. An hour later, Meng Xian and her group arrived at the Gao village safely. This place was much bigger than the Meng House village. There were 2 streets and several rows of 2-story buildings. There were fences with perimeter to prevent wild beasts. Besides, there were quite a few gunmen patrolling around the camp. After paying some fees, she temporarily settled down in the village. After making arrangements for everyone, Meng Xian then headed towards the core area of the village. Boss Gao, long time no see. Miss Meng, how have you been recently? A man in his 50s squinted his eyes into a slit when he smiled. Anyone heading to the eastern wasteland who stayed at Boss Gao's place for a night wouldn't be troubled by the gangs from the camps outside Black Rock City. As Meng Xian was about to leave, a piece of news caught her attention. Hey, do you know about Wild Wolf Town? They had wiped out a group of soldiers, about 50 or 60 men. Today they were defeated. Soldiers? The image of Zhao Yu popping up in her mind. She curiously asked, they were just wearing military uniforms, right? No. It's said that those soldiers were very disciplined, clearly professionally trained. In my opinion, Li Yang is even daring to rob such people. After learning about the two conflicts that occurred near Fallout Shelter 12988, Meng Xian was almost 50% sure that the suddenly appearing military force was belonging to Zhao Yu. This was because there was a person named Meng Meng in their camp who was a survivor rescued by Zhao Yu from aliens, and she had come from the Fallout Shelter 12988. Zhao Yu's movements tend to be towards the north, coinciding with Fallout Shelter number 12988. Since it's an army that only a major force could train, I guess Wild Wolf Town is doomed. It's probably not someone from a major force. Boss Gao laughed. It's not only the major forces that can train armies. In Black Rock City, the 4 great families and the 8 great merchant associations all specifically train soldiers. These soldiers do nothing but train every day. Meng Xian had not heard of the 4 great families, but she was aware of the 8 great merchant associations, which were said to be large-scale merchant groups that traded between various cities. Some were local merchant associations, while others were branches from other places. The wilderness is extremely dangerous. Without highways or railway tracks for transporting goods, running trade between cities requires a strong military team. Do you mean that the unknown troop could be from the 8 great merchant associations, or the 4 great families? There's a good chance. If people from a large group were ambushed, they would definitely destroy Wild Wolf Town immediately, instead of just raiding the outbound convoys, Boss Gao laughed. The reason they do this is obviously because their strength is not strong enough, or they dare not reveal their identities. Meng Xian was quite interested in it and asked curiously, do the people of the 8 merchant associations also not dare to touch the Wild Wolf Town? It's not that they don't dare. No matter how powerful Wild Wolf Town is, it's just a wilderness force and cannot compare with the people of Black Rock City. However, Wild Wolf Town manufactures arms and weapons for Black Rock City, so it has a background. Thus, the unknown troop does not dare to openly retaliate against Wild Wolf Town, probably for this reason. Thinking of Zhao Yu's claimed affiliation with the Rizhao Corporation, is it possible that it's people from a large group who just temporarily can't send troops to eliminate Wild Wolf Town?
Impossible.
Even if the large group can't spare the manpower for a while, as long as they speak to the Black Rock City officials, there will be plenty of people to wipe out Wild Wolf Town. Thinking it over, Meng Xian realized that this made sense. The things controlled by the large groups were extremely precious, and even a tiny leak would be enough for Black Rock City to thrive. Zhao Yu's background might not be the Rizhao, but one of the 8 merchant associations of Black Rock City. Meng Xian felt a secret joy in her heart, not expecting to gain such an unexpected reward from this trip. By the way, Wild Wolf Town has issued a reward. If anyone knows the details of that group, they can inform them, with a reward of 100,000 Black Rock coins. Ah, both sides are big forces. I'm not qualified to get involved, Meng Xian said self-deprecatingly, then bid farewell to Boss Gao and returned to her room to rest. She continued to investigate the purpose of Zhao Yu and his group's venture. Assuming Zhao Yu is from one of the 8 great merchant associations, why would they establish a camp in the wilderness? The reason to hide their identities? Meng Xian felt there must be some secret behind this, but she couldn't guess it at the moment. However, she thought she could take this opportunity to gain some benefits. As Boss Gao said, since Zhao Yu dares not reveal his identity, even if he is backed by one of the 8 great merchant associations, he would have to pay a confidentiality fee.
Ah!
Meng Xian couldn't help but laugh out loud, feeling that this trip had been very profitable. After getting up, Zhao Yu started training soldiers according to the plan. 2.5 hours later, 30 soldiers walked out of the training camp. Thus, he now had a total of 60 soldiers, all incorporated into the guard team and divided into 3 guard platoons, each with 20 people, according to the commander's organization. The commander's organization is 5 people per squad, 20 per platoon, and 100 per company. Zhao Yu didn't have enough technological points to equip the 3 guard platoons with commanders. However, with their strength, there was no need for commanders. They just needed to deter ordinary people. With manpower at hand, Zhao Yu immediately assigned a guard platoon to take care of the security of the camp construction outside the East Gate. He also summoned 10 engineers and brought out his plans for the military, residential, and industrial areas. These were relatively simple and within the capabilities of the engineers. Thus, Zhao Yu assigned 3 engineers to the residence area to lead the recently gathered 50 residents to build the camp outside the East Gate. Then, he took the remaining 7 engineers and the 2 guard platoons to his planned military base area. He didn't plan to use outsiders to build this military base. It was his secret base, and apart from his soldiers, no one else was allowed to get involved. Zhao Yu had the assault squad take charge of the area's security and led about 40 soldiers to start the bustling task of logging. The planned military base was currently just a primitive forest, requiring the trees to be cleared and cement base, a substantial amount of work. Fortunately, with the engineers overseeing it, Zhao Yu didn't need to put in too much effort. After staying for a while, he took the remaining reconnaissance squad back to the base. The security of the base was temporarily in the hands of the sniper squad and the remaining 2 land infantry. Although they were few in number, no one dared to trouble his base for now. After returning to the base, Zhao Yu took the reconnaissance squad to inspect the work outside the East Gate. As soon as he arrived, Eagle came to greet him. "Centurion Zhao, I wonder why and what you are doing here. We rescued some survivors, and we are planning to establish a camp here for them to live in," Zhao Yu said casually. Eagle scratched his head, seemingly unable to find a good reason to refuse. After all, the initial agreement did not specify that Zhao Yu couldn't build another camp outside the East Gate. Moreover, their location was to the north of the East Gate, and the newly constructed camp was to the south of the East Gate, so both sides would not interfere with each other. Upon inspecting the site, Zhao Yu found that his people were working efficiently. Not only was no one slacking off, but they were also working with great enthusiasm. He approached someone with relatively high prestige to ask about the situation. "Sir, it's really great that you took us in. We're willing to work under you as long as we can have meals like the one yesterday every day." After a brief conversation, Zhao Yu realized that these people had no intention of running away. Instead, they wanted to stay. Just a meal could win over people's hearts now. Zhao Yu felt it was almost magical and asked in return, "Don't you have family or friends back in Wild Wolf Town?" Family? In these times, what family or friends are there? What about a wife or children? None. Too bad. Well, work hard then. As long as I'm alive, you'll not lack food to eat." Zhao Yu shook his head and said, "Thank you, sir. We will definitely work our hardest for you." The thin man quickly expressed his commitment. Zhao Yu nodded and sent the man back to work. He didn't mention anything about paying wages. In these times, wages was impractical, and he didn't want to deal with such complications. He had some plans for these people. There was a piece of indoor cultivated farmland at the fallout shelter, and it would be troublesome to have the soldiers handle it. So Zhao Yu planned to send these people there to help him farm. Of course, this would have to wait until the Wild Wolf Town issue was resolved. Otherwise, the enemy could attack them from time to interrupt their farming. Zhao Yu spent most of the day running between the military and residence areas, inspecting the work and communicating with several commanders, discussing military strategies and experiences. In addition, Zhao Yu also took stock of his recent gains. Besides acquiring several dozen vehicles, the most valuable items for him were gasoline and ammunition. After recycling the acquired ammunition, he had enough to support the creation of a functional, cannon-firing tank. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the new daily tasks were refreshed. Upon seeing the task content, Zhao Yu felt worried. "We've been discovered." Daily mission. Wild Wolf Town has obtained your location information and has already organized people to attack the base. Defeat this attack. Reward, 50 technology points. How did they know? Zhao Yu didn't expect that in less than a day, Wild Wolf Town would already know his location. It must be the surrounding villages. Zhao Yu realized the problem. Near the photovoltaic power plant, there were several small villages. It's likely that people from Wild Wolf Town had sent someone to inquire in various places. The villagers, who had seen Zhao Yu and his people driving by several times, might have informed on them, which seemed normal. Forget it. Let's fight. Zhao Yu was not one to shy away from a challenge. Since the enemy knew his location, he was ready for a straightforward battle. Wild Wolf Town was heavily guarded and difficult to attack, but if they dared to come out, he could catch them off guard. With this in mind, he quickly gathered several commanders to discuss the combat situation. Sir, there are two urgent matters. One is to equip walkie-talkies to ensure that the reconnaissance team can be reached and relay information back. Second is to acquire some drones to keep track of enemy movements. Zhao Yu immediately went to the munitions factory, exchanged a batch of walkie-talkies, and equipped each recon soldiers with one. He then dispatched the 5 members of the reconnaissance team under the command of a sergeant. Following that, he exchanged for a batch of small drones, some electrical-driven power and others fuel-powered. However, no one under his command could operate these devices. He could learn, but what he lacked most was time. Therefore, Zhao Yu spent the 10 technology points he had naturally accumulated that day to train 2 drone pilots. There were recon soldiers capable of controlling drones, but they were too expensive, so Zhao Yu chose the cheapest options. Right now, what he lacked most were technology points. Other resources, besides gasoline and ammunition, were not in short supply anymore. Therefore, Zhao Yu chose the costly military reconnaissance and strike drones, capable of both scouting and combat missions. He also made a few regular reconnaissance drones, noticing some differences compared to the military ones. The regular reconnaissance drones could be controlled with a notebook-like remote. However, the high-end military reconnaissance drones simulated airplane controls with a complete ground cockpit. It had 2 joysticks for direction control and pedals for throttle and adjusting the drone's flight attitude. Moreover, the ground cockpit had a large display screen showing the drone's view, with multiple modes, displaying the distance to the enemy and other parameters. Of course, the military reconnaissance and strike drone Zhao Yu chose was not the best. The best ones were much larger, about 10 meters long, like fighter jets, equipped with missiles. Currently, Zhao Yu couldn't manufacture missiles, so exchanging for such drones was pointless. The drone Zhao Yu chose was a kind of small reconnaissance and strike drone, 2 meters in length, with a wingspan of over 3 meters, equipped with a machine gun for strafing missions. Operate the 2 Hummingbird drones to scout out the situation. The Hummingbird drone was smaller in size, one of the rechargeable models, and it was equipped with a high-definition camera for reconnaissance purposes only. Although Zhao Yu had some gasoline on hand, it wasn't much, so he decided to first deploy the electrical-driven reconnaissance drones to survey the situation. Under the control of the 2 pilots, 2 small drones took off, circling around the base to ensure there were no abnormalities, then flew towards the northwest. Following this, Zhao Yu exchanged a large amount of military equipment as advised by the commanders. Mortars, rocket launchers, ladder trucks, and more. Since his base lacked watchtowers and sentry posts, he acquired several ladder trucks that could extend up to a height of several meters, where machine guns or sniper rifles could be mounted. Uncertain of the direction the enemy might attack, Zhao Yu didn't deploy these ladders yet. They were kept near the base, waiting for intel from the reconnaissance drones. Report: suspicious target spotted. One of the pilots suddenly reported to Zhao Yu. Zhao Yu quickly gathered with several commanders. On the drone's display, a convoy of dozens of vehicles was seen moving along a road, heading towards the direction of his base. They haven't discovered our drone, have they? Report, sir. We're on a covert reconnaissance mission. The drone is at an altitude of 1,500 meters. One of the commanders explained, at this altitude, unless they're using telescopes or electronic radar to scan, it's very difficult to detect such small reconnaissance drones. Good. Zhao Yu nodded. Now that the enemy was discovered, it made things much easier. After detailed observation, the commanders obtained the information they needed. The enemy has a total of 150 people, equipped with rocket launchers, mortars, machine guns, and other weapons. This time, The enemy had sent out all combat soldiers. Moreover, to prevent ambushes, they deliberately used more vehicles than needed, ensuring that each vehicle was not fully occupied. This way, even if they were attacked with rocket launchers, the loss of combat force would not be too significant. Tell me about the plan. We can set up mines on their paths, then fire a round of mortars. Let the soldiers ambush on both sides of the road outside the base and launch rockets too as a wave of firepower. The commander gave a battle plan. Zhao Yu felt a headache coming on. We don't have that many cannonballs. He was still in the stage of lacking the raw materials to make cannonballs. Commander, if we retrieve all the ammunition we have, we can create the shells we need. Zhao Yu glanced at the data provided by the commander. To gather enough ammunition for the upcoming battle, he would need to recycle 70 to 80,000 bullets, virtually depleting his reserves. After a moment's hesitation, he agreed. If he could win, he would be able to seize ammunition from the enemy. How long until the enemy arrives? Half an hour. You handle the preparations. Call back all the guards from the military base and the resident area. This battle was crucial for the survival of the base, and Zhao Yu didn't want to lose. He planned to use every available resources. Of course, if he did end up losing, he would immediately transform the base into a mobile form and escape without a second thought. Damn it, if we're going to fight, let's go big. Zhao Yu was determined, directing people to drive dozens of vehicles, along with the firearms he had confiscated over the past few days and the ones he had made himself, and quickly headed towards the East Gate. When he arrived at the East Gate with great momentum, Eagle had already received the news and gathered a large number of armed men, all ready for action. Centurion Zhao, we have always kept to ourselves. What are you planning to do with such a big movement? Eagle called out nervously from several dozen meters away. He hadn't expected Zhao Yu, who had just been suddenly bring so many vehicles. He was unsure of Zhao Yu's intentions. Eagle, I have a big deal to discuss with you. To show his sincerity, Zhao Yu stepped out of the convoy with just a few people. Eagle hesitated but didn't dare to shoot. After giving a few quick orders, he also stepped forward with a few men. I'm about to fight a battle with another force and urgently need ammunition. Whatever you have, I'll buy it all. Zhao Yu got straight to the point. The people from Wild Wolf Town were almost there, and he didn't have time for lengthy explanations. Ah! Eagle was stunned, not expecting Zhao Yu's visit to be for a transaction. Don't dawdle on it. Cars, machine guns, rifles, or food. Whatever you want, I'll sell. Zhao Yu urged. Eagle was unsure whether Zhao Yu was serious or not. Who are you fighting against? Wild Wolf Town. What? Eagle was shocked. How had Zhao Yu gotten involved with a local power like Wild Wolf Town? Just tell me how much ammunition you have for sale. I'll take all types, no matter what the bullets are. This? 30,000 rounds of ammunition, 2 missiles of unknown type that we picked up from an abandoned military base. You have missiles? Zhao Yu was not expecting such good fortune. No matter the type, as long as he could recycle them, he could remake them into usable missiles. Tell me what you want. Can we discuss it? Zhao Yu didn't want to haggle and directly said, 10 vehicles, 100 rifles, 10 machine guns for your 30,000 bullets and those 2 missiles. How about that? Eagle was surprised by the generous offer. They had privately asked around about the missiles, and no one wanted them. They were reluctant to discard them, so they had been stored in the outskirts of their camp. Deal. Eagle quickly nodded, fearing Zhao Yu might change his mind. Then let's get started. Zhao Yu directly commanded his men to bring over 10 vehicles and drop them off, followed by 100 rifles and 10 machine guns. Eagle also hurried back and soon brought the 2 missiles and all the bullets. Zhao Yu's eyes lit up when he saw the missiles. They were 3 meters long, big enough for his needs. The exchange was quickly made, and without wasting any time, he took the ammunition and missiles back to the base. Eagle and his men were left looking at each other, then broke into ecstatic smiles. We have cars now, but it seems there's not much gasoline left in the tanks. No problem with cars. Who worries about gasoline? Back at the base, Zhao Yu swiftly sent the collected bullets and 2 missiles into the recycling furnace of the munitions factory. He soon saw many new weapons and equipment appear in the previously exchanged list, including fighter jets. But currently, There were no pilots capable of flying fighter jets, and the fuel consumption was too high. After a brief selection and communication with the commanders, he was disappointed to find that no one could operate a tank. He eventually exchanged for a medium-sized reconnaissance and strike drone, 8 meters in length, capable of carrying 2 missiles. The tens of thousands of bullets he collected were also added to the mortar and rocket launchers. On the other side, the commander also deployed the soldiers to their respective positions. Everything was ready, and the pilot reported that the enemy was only a 5-minute journey away from the base. Report, the enemy has stopped, and it seems they want to send someone over for reconnaissance. This move by the enemy will trigger the landmines we've laid. I suggest we attack immediately. The original plan was to wait for the enemy to enter before starting the battle. But now, since the enemy had sent out a reconnaissance team from such a distance, there was no need to wait. All right, proceed as planned.
Attack.
On the display screen, the majority of the enemy troops had abandoned their vehicles and were now gathering together to call the roll, seemingly planning to approach on foot. This was exactly what Zhao Yu wanted. He had 2 missiles, and it wouldn't be easy to hit the enemy if they were too spread out. Soon, 2 pilots were operating the reconnaissance drones back to base before switched to a new cockpit. The medium-sized integrated reconnaissance and attack drone looked similar to a fighter jet, with a streamlined body that looked powerful and imposing, especially with the 2 missiles hanging under the wings, which boosted Zhao Yu's confidence. Take off. This thing consumed a lot of fuel. Zhao Yu had collected 200 liters of gasoline to produce only 160 liters of aviation kerosene. This amount of kerosene wasn't enough for a long flight, but fortunately, the enemy wasn't too far away, so it should be sufficient. The internal roads of the photovoltaic power plant were quite long, well suited for the drone's takeoff. After accelerating down the long runway, the medium-sized integrated reconnaissance and attack drone took to the sky. Everyone listen up, I have only one requirement. Annihilate the enemy, no prisoners. Li Yang stood on top of a vehicle, loudly addressing the roughly 100 people around him, rallying them before the battle. At this moment, he seemed full of confidence in this attack. The people below, upon hearing this, responded loudly in unison. They stopped at quite a distance from the photovoltaic power plant, so speaking loudly was not an issue. Li Yang suddenly heard a strange noise. What's that sound? Others heard it too, and instinctively looked up. A fighter jet? Why is there a fighter jet here? He had an ominous premonition that the jet was coming for them.
Impossible.
As he doubted, a horrifying scene unfolded. He saw 2 missiles hanging from the bottom of the fighter jet, hurtled towards them at an even greater speed. It's over. Li Yang's mind went blank. Fighter jet? Run. Get down.
Missile.
The scene turned chaotic, and the missiles didn't give them any chance to evade. As people just started to react, the missiles struck right in the center of the crowd. Boom! Boom! 2 earth-shattering explosions followed. Blood and limbs scattered everywhere. In just a brief moment, dozens were killed instantly. My leg. I can't see. Help me. Save me. I don't want to die. Cries and screams filled the air. Before they could grasp the situation, mortar shells began to fall. Boom! 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 Mortar shells rained down incessantly, smashing into the crowd. The mortar shells' projectile motion were calculated by the system, hit their targets almost without fail, each aimed for maximum impact. Heavy firepower tore through the area. Dozens of vehicles were blown to pieces, and a whole forest was set ablaze. The few survivors scattered in all directions, yet before they could get far, a small drone pursued them. In addition, soldiers already lying in ambush around the perimeter began to encircle and attack these panicking enemies. This battle turned out even better than Zhao Yu had anticipated. The moment the 2 missiles were launched, the victory was assured. The subsequent actions were just to maximize the impact of the victory. Li Yang, until his death, never imagined that Zhao Yu would have fighter jets and missiles. Had he known who he was offending, he might have abandoned Wild Wolf Town and fled for his life. Clean up the battlefield. After this round of fighting, Zhao Yu did not even have enough bullets. He could only send people to the battlefield to see if there was anything useful. After the bombardment of missiles and mortars, Many weapons and equipment on the battlefield were damaged. However, a munitions factory's recycling furnace meant that even the damaged items could be recycled and remanufactured, so it wasn't a loss. What do you think? If I lead an attack on Wild Wolf Town now, can we take it down? Zhao Yu called several commanders to ask. After a brief calculation, the senior commander said, there's a 13.6% chance of victory. Then forget it. Zhao Yu sighed. There were still quite a few armed personnel left in Wild Wolf Town. According to the initial reconnaissance, there were at least 200 armed individuals there. The battlefield was cleaned up very thoroughly. Aside from the various broken weapons and equipment being recycled in the furnace, even the limbs and body parts were collected. Fighter jets.
Missile 1.
Mortars 1. The war happening nearby was clearly visible from the camp outside the eastern gate. Everyone's faces filled with fear and unease. Do we need all this to attack Wild Wolf Town? Eagle was recalling what Zhao Yu said during the trade. Wild Wolf Town might be strong, but compared to the Rizhao Corporation, it was nothing more than an ant. Was it worth deploying fighter jets and missiles for them? But now, they really had. The distance was too far for them to realize that the 8-meter-long fighter jet was actually an unmanned integrated reconnaissance and attack drone. What do we do? Eagle was extremely anxious. Their neighbor had shown strength far beyond that of ordinary forces. He was unsure how to interact with them now, even started on considering relocating the camp. But he was just a temporary leader. Without Meng Xian's return, he dared not make many decisions. As Eagle was at a loss, Zhao Yu arrived in his vehicle. Centurion Zhao. Eagle called out respectfully. Although he knew Zhao Yu was from the Rizhao Corporation, it had not been verified, and he had almost annihilated Zhao Yu's group, so his attitude was not one of awe. But now, he had heard Zhao Yu talking about attacking Wild Wolf Town and witnessed a fighter jet to take off and release missiles shortly after. The scale of this war far exceeded his imagination. They were a small force without even a mortar, yet Zhao Yu had used fighter jets and missiles. Zhao Yu instructed someone to open the rear car door. Eagle seemed to understand something and instructed his men to back off before getting into Zhao Yu's car. Several soldiers naturally stood guard around the car, preventing others from approaching. Do you know why I'm looking for you? Zhao Yu asked indifferently. I don't know. Eagle had some guesses but dared not say them out loud. 2 days ago, my goods were robbed and more than 50 people were killed, Zhao Yu nodded and said. It was Wild Wolf Town's doing. Eagle hadn't expected Wild Wolf Town to be so bold as to rob Zhao Yu's goods. They deserved to be bombed by missiles. Yesterday, I sent people to take back my goods, killed more than 70 of them, and captured over 50 civilians. So that's how it was. Eagle finally realized where the civilians working outside the East Gate had come from. They were taken from Wild Wolf Town. Half an hour ago, my boss called and said that a strange force was approaching our base. What? Zhao Yu's boss wasn't even here, so how did they know? Suddenly, he thought of something, looked to the sky in shock. Satellites. Only satellites could detect the situation here from thousands of miles away. Only some major forces and large groups had satellites. That's not important. What's important is that 150 people from Wild Wolf Town came, and I didn't have enough manpower, so I called for air support. Air support, fighter jets, missiles. Centurion Zhao, what a strategy. Was surprised to witness an airstrike. The incoming enemies have been completely wiped out. Do you know why I'm here to see you now? His question left Eagle stunned, and he started to ponder. After a while, he said, the Rizhao Corporation is a major force, not something Wild Wolf Town can compare to. In theory, when they looted you before, they should have been wiped out, so why this time? Eagle ventured, so, do you have requirements not to expose your identity? Exactly. Zhao Yu nodded and said, now tell me, how can I do this without having to kill? Kill to hide the event? Eagle, realizing that they, being so close, had seen the fighter jet and missiles. So, they were about eliminating them. At such a close distance, he was confident he could kill Zhao Yu alone. But it was useless. He still couldn't stop his body from trembling. When had he ever made such a big decision? Even killing Zhao Yu would be futile. The man was from the Rizhao Corporation, capable of mobilizing fighter jets and missiles, and possibly even under satellite surveillance. The base I protect is conducting high-level experiments that require secrecy. Give me one reason within 10 minutes not to wipe out your Meng House village. Eagle felt helpless. They were only neighbors with Zhao Yu, yet they found themselves in such a predicament. He had no choice but to rack his brains. After a long time, he calmed down and analyzed that Zhao Yu did not really want to kill to them otherwise. He would have acted already. He just wanted an unnoticeable reason to keep the secrets of the Rizhao Corporation hidden. So, we can participate in this battle? Zhao Yu smiled and said, fighter jets and missiles. Nobody has seen them. Whoever has seen them dies. Yes, I can ensure this. I will inform the others in the village. I don't trust you. Gather your people later, take photos and register everyone. I will send your information to my superiors. If any news leaks, you know what will happen. Eagle's face showed bitterness. This was a blatant threat, but he had no choice but to agree. He took a deep breath. But even with our participation, we can't win against them. So, you need a better cover identity. What do you mean? The Rizhao Corporation's background cannot be exposed, so you need a plausible identity like Zhao Family Village or something. Zhao Family Village? Zhao Yu also realizing he was being suggested to establish a local wilderness force as a cover. Yes. Our region is too far from Black Rock City, and many messages are blocked. Nobody pays attention here, so it's normal to have a new Zhao Family Village. Especially since you've been living here, and with the old gathering place of the photovoltaic power plant being wiped out, you can integrate the old forces and establish a new one. Can this deceive them? A plausible growth story is all that's needed. Zhao Yu nodded slightly. This seemed like a good plan. His biggest problem was not being from the Rizhao Corporation. To anyone, Zhao Yu's asset of weapons was an attractive target. So, he needed to conceal the involvement of the missiles and fighter jets. There were too many people nearby, with over 300 people in Meng House Village alone, plus his captives, totaling nearly 400 who knew. With his current strength, it was impossible to truly eliminate them, so he needed a way to involve Meng House Village. Do you think Zhao Family Village or Zhao Family Fort is more appropriate? The village challenging a town is too much, so the fort is more suitable. Cooperation between a village and a fort doesn't seem realistic. Eagle started to scratch his head. I have an idea. Speak. Normally, villages and forts rarely collaborate in such battles. But if the village head and the fort leader have a personal connection, then it's possible. Eagle looked intently at Zhao Yu. Our village head happens to be a woman. He thought to himself that although this was a crisis, it could also be an opportunity. Collaborate with Zhao Yu could help their village develop. Just from the trade in this war alone, they had already gained an advantage. Okay, let's do that. I'll be Zhao Family Fort. You'll be Meng House Village. We'll collaborate to wipe out the invaders from Wild Wolf Town. Spread the word, Centurion Zhao. Just spreading the word like that seems too deliberate. We need a reason. Eagle bit the bullet. Let's jointly issue a declaration of war against Wild Wolf Town. Include the reasons for the battles in it, along with the situations of the 3 fights. Declaration of war. Zhao Yu thought for a moment, finding his suggestion sensible, and nodded in agreement. Let's do as you said. Then, the two discussed some more details, talking for over half an hour before concluding.